The deployment of 5G to ultimately be deemed successful, its integration across geographies needs to be seamless. And to help us understand if, in fact, urban and rural India is future ready with respect to fifth-generation technology, fortunately, we're joined by a panel of subject matter experts next. And I ask that they please take their seat on stage as I announce their name. To navigate the discussion, can I please invite on stage the head of India and South Asia at Analysis Mason, Rohan Thamija. Please join us on stage, sir, towards the center. And joining him are distinguished panelists who include the Secretary of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, Sunil K. Gupta, the Director of the Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, Professor Uday B. Desai. Thank you, sir. Executive Vice President of Technology Planning at Vodafone Idea Limited, Mudit Agarwal. We have with us the Senior Vice President of New Technology Initiatives at Reliance Jio, Ayush Bhatnagar. Director General of the Cellular Operators Association of India, Rajan S. Matthews. DGG Policy, Department of Telecommunications, Kishore Babu. And to close out the panel, we have the Business Head of Point Next Communications and Media Solutions at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Sriram Rajagopalan. Thank you, sir. And Rohan, we'll let you take over from here.
Sure, thank you so much. Good afternoon to the audience and a very warm welcome to all my fellow panelists. The title of the panel, of course, over the next 30 to 40 minutes is Network Infrastructure Readiness for 5G. But just to mix things up a little bit, I was hoping that rather than just touch upon network infrastructure readiness, we touch upon readiness in general. And I say that also because basis the report that was launched earlier in the day, the ET Telecom Analysis Mason report that was launched, a major section of that report focused on general readiness for 5G in India. And by means of that report over the last couple of weeks, we interviewed and surveyed close to 500 senior telecom professionals, and they provided their own views on various matters related to readiness of 5G in India. So with that as background, I'd love to hear the panelists' views on various topics and issues related to 5G readiness in India. So if I may start with you, Rajan, and I always do that. It's just to set the context for the audience here, before we actually get into readiness, to actually understand what the use cases of 5G in India would be. And of course, we've gotten some pretty interesting results from our survey that we published in the report. And also because readiness would vary, especially infrastructure readiness would vary depending on what use case gets pursued first as opposed to later. So just your thoughts first on what the use cases of 5G in India would be.
So thank you, Rohit. I think all of us, both in the industry and outwards, are looking at our crystal balls and they're extremely fuzzy at this moment. And so we're all taking wild guesses as to what this thing is looking at. So I think this is where industrial policy from the government is particularly important in terms of saying, if India is going to take the lead in terms of establishing its position as one of the leaders in 5G, then the readiness to get there is important. That's why the high-level forum that was established by the DOT was very, very important. And I think out of that emerged 5 areas. And of course, when we talk about smart cities, there's multiplicity of use cases that emerge from there. But we've highlighted health, we've highlighted traffic management, waste management, education, as some of the areas, the 5 areas or so, that we should be looking at particular use cases that are going to drive development. And I think that's one of the key focus that we should keep, that in a country such as ours, where we have 1.2 billion people, unless we are oriented in terms of use cases, in terms of development, I think we have really nothing unique to offer to the countries around us in terms of how we do things.
Very interesting. So social impact angle to the use case development. Now just for the audience's benefit, so when the survey results got published, the two use cases, or the category of use cases rather, that most respondents, up to 78% of respondents said were going to be most popular in India were FWA, which is fixed wireless access, and smart cities. So smart cities you of course touched on, but Kishore, if I may take this to you, this is quite interesting for me personally, because world over when we worked on 5G use cases, when we've helped governments, regulators, and operators think through use cases, enhanced mobile broadband is often the use case that's spoken most often about. So just your thoughts on how FW and smart cities seems to be top of mind for telecom professional respondents here in India, as opposed to EMBB?
If you really look at, I mean, when you're examining the issue going beyond not just network readiness and readiness of 5G itself, I want to add something here, before looking really into that, FW and EMBB issues. Most of us have already seen what the new digital communication policy, which is the draft available to all of us, is already expressing. If you look at, there is something very important thing in the draft NDCP. What we can see is that, especially there is a lot of focus about creating network, which is available for the next generation services, call it 5G and others. And other most important thing is that there is something called existential framework. Like for example, when we say about, apart from creating in a general terms that we'll be creating network for 5G, etc., it says that India wants to be in the top 50 of the ITU ICT Development Index, which is actually putting us on, on a race, I should say, that we should complete all the necessary requirements. Like for example, now coming to the closer to your point, to be in top 50 for India, we should have 412 million fixed broadband connections in the country. That is the, top 40 countries which are already accomplishing to be in the top 50 of the ICT Development Index. So coming to 5G specific, when you say about FWA is one of the, I should say that more, respondents are responding that it is going to be the top use case application. It's very important. It's, it's understood, because most of us, when we say about 4G or 5G, the moot question is about 4G as 4G, 5G as 5G, not just 4G, not just 5G. So naturally, people are, I should say, really craving for the capability of the service or generation service in the refined terms. That's the most important one. Yes, I appreciate that FWA is one of the important requirements for, making any product use of the applications as well as services to experience the benefits of the rollout. Just to add one more thing, before switching, when I said about the existential framework, one is about India in top 50, and second thing is about there's also numbers about Wi-Fi networks, how they are going to serve this, that mobile or fixed services. There is also a mention about sustainability of the fixed, that infrastructure for the networks. Perhaps we may look into that more details in the later parts of the question. From my side, yes, I could fully agree that that is going to be one of the important applications, but 5G as 5G is something very important to us.
Understood. And Ayush, if I could quickly poll you first from an operator's perspective, from Reliance Jio's perspective, you disrupted 4G. What are your thoughts on use cases for 5G? And then Professor Desai, if you could get your thoughts on the matter as well, quickly.
So just like other speakers also mentioned, there are two categories of use cases. The first category is the bread and butter use cases, which include high-speed data connectivity, without which no other value-added service can ride on top of it. And then you have the use cases like industrial IoT and smart cities, which contribute to nation building. So these are the most important use cases that we should target first. And then there is a third use case, which would also help in the ecosystem development of chipsets and also the devices, which is not very much spoken about, but is getting quietly standardized. That is voice over 5G. It is like having salt in food. It has become a commodity, at least in the Indian market, post the launch of services by Jio. But without providing voice and data services, we will not be able to create economies of scale. So I believe these are the basic use cases we should start with.
Professor Desai, from your perspective.
I think I agree in the sense, as everybody has said, high-speed access, both wireless and fixed, access is also important. Now, use cases, sometimes we have been talking a lot about it since morning, everybody has referred to it. We need to think a little differently. We don't have to wait for 5G to embark on use cases. Okay. In a sense, suppose you look at agriculture. Okay, and that happens to be a use case. Or you look at healthcare. We can start enabling that right now. What my concern has been that we talk a lot about use cases, but we are not activating it. The fact is that if I have a use case which works on a 10 Mbps network, tomorrow when a 1 gigabit network is available to me, I can upgrade that use case. And I don't have to wait for the 1 gigabit network to do it. Yes, some use cases will be only for 1 gigabit network. And as was mentioned, that is, you're talking about robotic surgery. Okay? Now, that's a very, very niche use case. And that's going to take a fair amount of time. The medical industry is not going to adopt it yesterday or that quickly. So we need to first of all look at that. Having said that, the way to enable, in my opinion, use case is not by the mega companies. We need to really kind of disrupt it, have a large number of startups. So essentially, both the private and the government to work together and see how we can create startups. No, very rarely I would say a big mega company is going to invest in use case unless and until they see a big profit. Startups will get into it. And I think that is the best way to actually enable and get going with the use case part of it. And to support use case, I would like to mention what the high-level forum has recommended. Okay, there are two big things they have done. One is they have funded the test beds, which can be used for use cases. It's a fair amount of funding that has been given. I think the Madam Secretary talked about it. And the second thing, which is that DOT has invited OEMs to create pilots in the country. Okay? They have said that, yes, you take pockets out there. In fact, they want it to be in like east, west, north, south, geographically distributed. Those pilots themselves can become avenues for use cases. And that's essentially my take on it.
Understood. So then moving on, and if I may start with you from a government's perspective, Mr. Gupta, just your thoughts on when 5G would commercially launch in India.
Let us understand that when we are talking about 5G, and as my colleague has rightly pointed out, 5G means 5G and not like today we are talking about 4G, but many people may not be satisfied with the 4G services as whole. So if we are really looking for the 5G, there will be two primary services which will be launched. Number one is enhanced high-speed broadband. Now, as far as enhanced high-speed broadband is concerned, it will be launched first, which includes a part of fixed mobile access as well, which will be there. The reason being is that for that thing to be launched, what we require is the spectrum. We have already recommended price for the spectrum, and auction, etc., can happen in the well-defined time frame. Second thing what is required is the fiberizations, because unless we connect our backhaul with the fiber, we will not be able to provide the services which we commit to provide under the 5G backhaul. Now, in this particular regard, a lot of work has to be done as yet, because only about 25% of the BTSs are connected with the optical fiber. Though a lot of work is going on, and there was a hindrance by way of not getting the right of way. But since DOT has already notified their rules and a lot of changes are happening in the state level, we hope that this will be taken care of, and then this will be rolled out by around 2020 or 21 framework. Coming to the other thing which will be followed very closely by that is that massive IoT, or we say machine-to-machine communication. On machine-to-machine communication, it will not only be driven by the telecom service provider. This is my perception. For that, you had to look into the device manufacturers, the sensor manufacturers, the integrators, the app developers, and also the telecom service providers. So there is a very strong need to have a ecosystem development where all the people can come up, tell what their problems are, how their problems can be resolved, and we collectively, not only the industry, but also the government, has to work together to streamline the functioning and rollout. Unless that is done, I'm afraid that this will not be implemented very fast. For this, it will also be very important that when everybody in the ecosystem comes, they will be giving the real projection of the money which can be generated by the 5G, and that will be a motivator for telecom service provider to move fast and implement the 5G. Thank you.
Mr. Gupta, if I may put you under a little bit of a spot and ask you what year would you put your money on?
If you look at for enhanced broadband, I will say the time is right now. There is absolutely no delay, because the rise in the demand of the bandwidth, which is happening on every month basis, is very clear indication that people are hungry of the bandwidth, and any bandwidth what you are going to provide will be consumed. And here it is also very important that everybody and most of us will be complaining that the bandwidth what we want, we are not getting that. So this indicates that time is right and ripe that you should put your money for the enhanced broadband infrastructure.
Great, thanks. Mudal, let me come to you from Vodafone's perspective, Vodafone Idea's perspective now. Congratulations on the merger. If you had to pick an year or a window of a couple of years, so prior to 2020, between 2020 and 2022, or post 2022, what are your thoughts in terms of when India will be ready to launch 5G commercially, sure, and when it actually will launch 5G commercially?
Sure. So let me break the question into 2 or 3 parts. Number one is there are some elements of 5G which we are already building in. Most of the telcos are already building in. Vodafone globally has been a leader in this space, whether it be doing the trials on 5G or whether it be going for the next generation IoT use cases. Vodafone has been a leader globally. In India also, Vodafone and some other telcos have already launched a set of 5G set of capabilities as part of 4G advanced rollouts. So most of us in major cities, we have done massive MIMO rollouts. We are deploying cloud core solutions. We are working on programmable IP solutions, quite advanced, and hyperscale optic solutions are being deployed by and large. So if you see, many aspects of 5G are being mined and being deployed, and they are getting towards some maturity over a period of time. Now, the key question before us is, before we can make the investment of 5G viable, there are a set of prerequisites that needs to happen, right? For the 5G ecosystem to come, and you made a very right point that large number of startups should come into the space. To connect them, we need to open up API gateways. We need to have cloud native alignment on what the cloud native architecture would be. How will we move to the containers kind of a model? If it comes to programmable IP, we need to have alignment on the Yang models and how will we build them? And then, and only then will programmable IP see the light of the day. Now, if we do all of this, then and only then the investments in 5G will start making sense. So, as all of us have rightly put, that ecosystem building, whether it be on getting the Qualcomm and other chipsets right, whether we getting the device manufacturers to embrace them, and then we getting the subscribers to adopt those devices and getting to 20–30% penetration level before the economy starts to kick in. So ecosystem development is something that we are all working towards. There are some parts of 5G which are already starting to come in place and they are being called 4G advanced. It is number one in radio, massive MIMO. It multiplies the capacity of a radio site by 3 to 5 times immediately, and will start multiplying it by 7 times, which is huge. And that is already coming into place in a very, very big manner. The second big impediment is the backhaul from the radio site. And there we need regulation enablement. For example, E-band, etc. Unless the backhaul is reached to the site, the capacity, just making half a road is not going to give an experience to the user that he needs. So that is enablement number one that needs to be done. Number two, we need to work with the devices and the chipsets as we discussed. Number three, we need to work on network slicing protocols, on cloud native standards and specifications. We need to come together on Yang models and IP models, etc. And once that happens, and my sense is this all will take about a year and a half to get to some reasonable level of kickstart maturity, and full maturity will start coming in 2 years onwards. Right, so
around 2020-21
is when this will really start taking off.
Sure. Oh, fantastic. So Sriram, if we may get your perspective as well. Now, you of course approached this from a slightly different perspective from your role at HP. So just your thoughts on what year do you think India would be ready for 5G commercial launches?
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. So first of all, right, from a HP perspective, we believe that today the world is hybrid, and if you see in the journey of cloud, we had a journey towards the cloud, and probably coming back to the data center, some of it at least. And again, we believe that the data will move and grow towards the edge. And I think this is what we heard from the speakers earlier in the day, right? So we believe the world is going to be hybrid. And again, there's no revolution, it's an evolution. We have different terminologies, advanced 4G, real 5G. But I think from my perspective, we need to have quality of service in 4G, and 5G as well. I think today probably that's an area probably the operators can focus on. Now, coming back to how we really touch 5G, I think we need to embrace technologies like SDN, right? Wherein we are able to abstract the physical network infrastructure. We are able to, I think, bring in the virtual network functions, right? Today, I believe we're not really embracing them tightly enough as a vendor community, right? So I think this is an area where we need to really improve upon the operators and vendors. I think standards are available. Probably they are loosely defined as Mudit has articulated earlier, but definitely I think there's a scope for improvement there. And coming back to the larger issue of infrastructure in India, definitely fiber infrastructure needs to improve. But again, it's not all doom and gloom. I'll give a personal example. My niece, she's a great musician, only 10, 12 years of age, but she learns from on her own, using Baiju's learning, using one of the devices offered by my friend sitting next to me, right? It's a great example. I would never have imagined this 2, 3 years ago, but it's happened a year back. So I think we can be optimistic. I think the people in this room, the talent in this room is amazing. We can make it happen in a couple of years' time. I don't see an issue.
Sure. So I think there's good alignment across the panel, and it's interesting to note that in all 6 CEO interviews that we did across telecom operators as well as vendor OEMs in India, all 6 seem to agree that 5G will commercially launch in India between 2020 and 2022. So good to know that everyone's aligned in terms of the survey results as well as the panels. Moving on then, Rajan, if I may come back to you. So let's say the launch happens anywhere between 2020 and 22. 2 questions to you. One, what do you think are the key technology enablers of 5G and for that launch to happen between 2020 and 22? And 2, what do you think are the key impediments to that launch happening by then? So enablers and impediments.
So let me start off with the impediments, right? And I think it's very clear that you can't cross the chasm in 2 steps. That's the famous thing. So I think unless you address the financial situation of the industry, you had a headline yesterday or today morning which is talking about an emerging monopoly situation if the financial situation is not addressed. And I think this is going to be one of the key factors. And I'm glad to say that when you look at the National Digital Communications Policy of 2018, it very clearly says, look, the industry must be viewed as not an extractive process where you extract revenue, but you have to optimize it. So I think that's a very critical process. So addressing this is going to be a critical issue because you're asking us, you know, you asked Mr. Gupta, do you have skin in the game? Sure. We have not only skin, but everything else in the game as well, right? So you've got to be able to monetize it. That's going to be a critical thing. The second thing that we're seeing is when we talk about 5G networks, we talk about one of the characteristics being densification of the networks. And when you start talking about densification of networks, you're obviously talking about issues like making sure that fiberization is part of the densification. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the type of quality experience for the customer. And so this leads us to the whole issue of right-of-way. And increasingly, what we're finding is that the states and the local municipalities are not aligned with the central right-of-way policies. And so it's become a real teeth pull in order to go district by district, state by state, municipality by municipality, trying to get these onerous permissions to be able to put our towers. Of course, these towers are going to come down. We're talking about smaller footprints and the whole 9 yards, but it does not get away from the fact that ultimately those permissions have to happen. And so these are 2 impediments that are sort of going to be key that we have to address going forward.
Sure. If I may just interject there, Rajan. So this is very interesting. The first thing that you mentioned was financial burden and stress for the MNOs. So out of all the CEOs that we spoke to, all telecom CEOs as part of this exercise, 100% of them cited that as the key impediment. And then we, of course, have our government stakeholders sitting here. Also, another key impediment was just the spectrum harmonization and spectrum policy, which I'll discuss with you, Mr. Gupta and Kishore, in a little bit. Well, back to you, sorry. You were discussing.
So talking about the enablers,
sure.
We've constantly harped about this notion about the pricing of spectrum. All right? I think this is a factor that has emerged where we're talking about operator-specified spectrum in the starting point, 100 megahertz of spectrum, going up to 400 to 600 megahertz of spectrum in the gigahertz range, right, the millimeter range. And if you're saying is that if the pricing, if you adopt the present pricing, and Mr. Gupta is here, but if you take 592 crore rupees per megahertz of spectrum, by the time you get 1 megahertz pan-India, you talk about 9,000 crore rupees. In the present context, if you ask, is that a fair price? It's certainly not going to help when you have to multiply that by 100 megahertz just to start. So I think we've got to come up with a revised paradigm as to how you price it. We're quite comfortable in terms of the use of the auction process for a transparent allocation. But the pricing of the allocation methodology needs to be looked at very clearly. So I think that's going to be one of the key enablers.
And couldn't agree more. This is something that we faced as well. My colleague Mark Colwell is here in the audience. He'll be moderating a panel. And we've actually completely changed our approach to all our spectrum valuation and business planning work that we do. Because the chunks in 5G spectrum are so large that a simple dollar per megahertz per pop benchmark can't be used similar to earlier technology spectrums. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, and so I think the final point in terms of an enabler is making sure that the ecosystem is ready. Because in India, its scale is everything. It's scale, 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 sure. High volume, low margin business, right? That's ultimately what's going to drive every aspect of the business that happens in India. So operators are at that cusp saying is that, please show me the use cases that allow me to scale up in quick time, right, with the speed that is necessary. And that is going to be critically driven by the total ecosystem, be it handsets, be it access devices, be it BTSs, any and all, right?
Sure.
And I think that's going to be a critical enabler as to, and this is where I think Make in India, the government has put that up as an industrial policy imperative. Yep. And I think we have to look very seriously in terms of how this fits in terms of having 5G become an indicator of the progress of India and where India stands as a nation in terms of progress.
Sure. Mr. Gupta, if I may get your quick comments on impediments and enablers.
See, while Rajan is very vociferous on the very bad status of the telecom industry, I don't agree totally with that. Let us see today. We have a smartphone penetration about 25%. In spite of that particular smartphone penetration, we are getting the data consumption in the range of about 6 GB per month per consumer, which comes out to be around 12, if you say about 1.2 billion customer we have got. Now, the adoption rate of the smartphone is more than 30%, which is a unique in the world. Nowhere in the world the such high adoption rate of the smartphone is there. What this indicates? This indicates that the consumption of data is going to be further enhanced. Now, if you look what you had to provide in initial stages, you have to have large investments. But gradient increase in provision of more data bytes is not that costly as it happens to be initial stages. Therefore, increase in the data consumption by the consumers with more of the smartphones, it is going to be mind-boggling, and it will definitely give you the incentive to move on to provide the higher sort of things. If you just calculate at the back of envelope that you have got 1.2 billion customers, and you just increase the, with the present pricing, the use of 1 GB more, then what's the impact which comes per month, and then calculate for the yearly basis. So industry is bad shape. That could be whenever any disruptive technology are coming, there are problems, but then industry has got its own capacity to recoup back, and this is recouping back, number one. Number second is that once you say that spectrum price is very high, we have been very careful this time to give the spectrum prices which are internationally benchmarked, and we have also considered that what are the auction happened for the 5G spectrum. So from that point of view, if you look into that perspective, you will find that spectrum prices are not that particular high. What is very, very important is that we are not coming and analyzing the use cases in terms of the potential of giving you revenue. Unless we do this sort of thing, you will always feel that whether we should go forward or not, because we are not aware that whether we will get that sort of return on investment or not. And that is how I told in the starting that there is a need that all the members of the ecosystem should come together and try to work out that what will be the financial gains if you move for the 5G services. So these impediments to me are very temporary in nature, and as the things will move on, these impediments will be taken care of by the things. Coming on right of way, I fully agree with Mr. Rajan Matthew that in spite of the efforts taken by the government, the ground reality has not changed to the extent which we wanted to be. And from that perspective, we have also recommended in our input to the policy that we should have some method like putting sort of connectivity index of different states, call the state people, tell them that what will be the advantages of the 5G rollout if this happens, and how governments will be benefited, how municipal corporation will be benefited, and it should not be taken as the only revenue model for them to provide the right of pay. And there, a lot of work has to be done, and I'm sure that the DOT, along with the other stakeholders, including TRI, will work forward so that the problem being faced by the telecom service provider in getting right of way is resolved to great extent.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Mr. Gupta. Two last questions for the panel. One I'll pose to the two operator representatives. The first two being, what % of revenues do you think will an operator earn from 5G by 2023?
So again, I'll answer the question in two parts. I'll say 5G technologies. A lot of 5G technologies will start getting adopted immediately, right? So for example, we discussed massive MIMO, we discussed cloud native deployments, programmable IP deployments, API gateways, agile policies, all of that. And they are already being deployed in quite an aggressive fashion, and therefore driving a lot of revenue already. So, and it is very critical to mature them, because they are prerequisite to making the 5G money successful. If we don't make them, if we don't get them to scale, and if we run to 5G prematurely, then 5G returns will not work out, and the investments will be muted to that extent. So if you look at 2020, from 5G, extraction of 5G related money from 4G deployments will be quite high, will be 20% plus. And by 2020 end, when we achieve that level of maturity, is the right time to then start a fresh cycle of investment on new 5G technologies. Right now, the effort should be to monetize 5G capabilities in 4G advanced networks and bringing about an alignment amongst the different ecosystem holders. That should be the focus.
Great. What about your thoughts, Yush, from Jio's perspective?
So I'll turn this question on its head. So like in 4G, we never ran after revenues. We delivered consumer value, and we passed on the benefits of 4G and voice over LTE to the customer transparently. And as you can see, the kind of response that we got, we are in the pink of health, even though the industry may not agree. Now, coming to 5G, we will continue to deliver consumer value significantly. And I believe that a consumer-centric model is going to be the new world. So as far as 5G is concerned, you also mentioned about the enablers. Most of the enablers, as far as Jio is concerned, are already ready. We are only waiting for the auction of spectrum, which we hope is going to happen ASAP, as soon as possible. And as and when it happens, we are going to go to market with a unique business proposition, much of it which cannot be discussed in a public forum. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's great. So just to add, if I may, to the operator's perspective, detailed work that Analysis Mason has done, business modeling work, work around monetization models for 5G. It is our opinion that by 2025, Indian operators would be able to drive close to 30 to 35% of their revenues from 5G or 5G-related services out of 4G, as you mentioned.
Absolutely.
So I think there's alignment in that sense. So final question for Professor Desai and Sriram.
Just one small point I wanted to make is, before we go into 5G spectrum, we should be cautious. If we put money into 5G spectrum, but if the real value of that has to wait for 2 years for the system to mature, then that is a money which could be better invested in extracting more out of 4G, because that will give better returns and experience to the population at large.
Of course, absolutely agree. So final question for Professor Desai and Sriram. So we of course talk about 5G in the context of the telecom industry, but 5G, just by the nature of the technology that it presents, is going to have a major impact on other industries. So what are your thoughts, Professor Desai first, and then Sriram, you to wrap up the panel. What are your thoughts on what are the 2 or 3 key industries outside of telecoms that will be impacted by 5G?
No, I think 5G is going to be for example, Industry 4.0, as we talk about, is going to be driven by 5G. It's going to be heavily dependent on 5G. It is quite likely, I'm not the right person, maybe Mr. Bhatnagar and others from industry. The percentage of revenue coming from Industry 4.0 for 5G may be comparable or even more than the average consumer who is using it. It's very difficult to predict it right now. Maybe they have some inside information based on which they may have a better perspective. But if I have to speculate, I would say Industry 4.0 will deliver a significant revenue. Now, the only bottleneck here is not just 5G. We need industry in India also to be ready to adopt Industry 4.0. Now, what are the drivers of Industry 4.0? IoT, big data, AI, all hungry for bandwidth. Okay, and who's going to give that bandwidth? 5G. Fine, some of it may be coming from fixed wireless. So definitely it's going to be very, very big. A couple of other industries, I think, it's kind of waiting to break out. It has not quit. What we will call remote telehealth services. A lot of work has gone on for last 20 years, but the impact has been very minimal. My hope is that telehealth services will have a great benefit because of 5G. I think suddenly, I think 5G may give that particular, that they will get over that hump. And another one, I think, was mentioned by Baiju and other things, various other, education. Particularly in India, where we talk about demographic dividend, a huge young population, how do we reach out to the masses with quality education? 5G can play a very, very major role out here.
Great. Sriram, your thoughts on the 2 or 3 tangential industries outside of telecom that will benefit most from 5G?
So first of all, so in my view, it has to impact the quality of life, right? The index of life, the quality of life in India must improve. We must leave a better generation of people behind. I think that should be the impact that 5G brings to India as a country, as a society. I think that's important. So it needs to bring improvement to the farmers, right? The students, and of course to the health overall of the country, right? I think that's what I would like to summarize and say what impact 5G should bring and must bring. Yeah.
Sure. Great. Fantastic. So thank you very much to all the panelists. We have a quick 5 minutes for a couple of questions from the audience. If the audience could specify which panelist the question is for.
Thank you so much. My question is to Mr. Kishore. So we've been, talking about that a significant role that 5G can play in bringing about the rural transformation. In fact, government is also focusing on that. Earlier in one of the sessions, Madam Secretary also highlighted a very strong need to deploy 5G in rural areas. And, it's a trust area for government. While, of course, the pace of deployment will not be similar, as urban and, metro cities. But when we talk about 5G, we still understand the government focus, whenever we talk about rural and remote areas or marginalized communities, we are still focusing on 2G technologies and, whatever tenders that we have, they are not pushing the latest technology. So we are talking about a technology laggard. So, in terms of 5G, will the approach of the government change? Are we looking at incentivize operators in terms of, increasing their deployments in rural area or, so what is the government doing in terms of, pushing that, 5G in rural areas? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, when we all speak about 5G, what comes to our immediately the knowledge about use cases is perhaps when you call EMBB, etc., and also considering the investment involved. There may be a focus about deploying it initially in the urban areas. But you're really, right on the point. When we look at any next generation technologies or services, focus is applicable for inclusive development. So when you mentioned about 2G service or 3G services for rural areas, in fact, you might have heard about when the government is rolling out the national optical fiber network, especially BharatNet. The plan is that now Gram Panchayats are planned to have at least minimum 1 Gbps as the backhaul capacity there to roll out the Wi-Fi services in the Gram Panchayat locations. That's the immediate plan. And also there is a proposal to enhance it to 10 Gbps capacity in the Gram Panchayats. And you may be aware that apart from this 2.5 lakh Gram Panchayats which we are considering under BharatNet program, we have got over 3 lakh villages which are dwellings of less than 1,000 people population. So we are also looking at what way we can provide the reliable, resilient broadband services to those communities as well, using Wi-Fi and as well as all the other wireless technologies available. Yes, there is a focus about, there is, I should say, renewed focus about how we can deliver to these remotely connected areas or unconnected areas for delivering this next generation services. And just to, while answering your point, I also take this opportunity to share, when we speak about rolling out, network readiness for 5G services, apart from the core infrastructure, I want to add here that there is a lot of importance about how we can make the existing infrastructure or future infrastructure sustainable. Because we are looking at considering the size of the country, lot of investment is going into capital into the fixed networks, fixed infrastructure, in fiberization, etc. There is a lot more importance for having the service infrastructure, especially GIS-based intelligence systems, where all the things, infrastructures underground, could be public utility, could be, telecom infrastructure. They should be available for any policymaker, for any operator, for the utility agency to make it sustainable. That is one of the important area we have taken up as part of the digital communication policy, apart from to extend the sustainable infrastructure to rural and remote villages.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vishal Sangvi. We are IoT company, and for Suraksha Bharat Abhiyan, we have invented smart camera, mobile cameras. So my question, we are preparing for the 5G, so do you think that all the stakeholders, like mobile operators, start to working for startup across the world, not in India actually, and create a case study? So whenever we launch the 5G, make sure our ROI should be much faster actually, and we should create ecosystems for those new business model actually. So what are the direction of the stakeholder like operators to, we make our products, but we connect with the 12 country startups to make those products. So how the, stakeholders has been connected worldwide startup? What is your strategy about that?
Rajan or Mudit, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Sure, I can start, and Rajan and others, you can fill me. So what can we do as operators? One, we should do a lot of things, starting with opening our APIs, creating standard API gateways, where we get the startups to plug in. We understand their requirements, and we help them take their use cases to scale and take them to customers, right? And that is what we can do start right away. Second, what we can do is create slices, which the different applications and different startups can use with the kind of profile they want to use the network as. And third, what we can do is do all of this at a very affordable cost for the startups. Those are some of the things that we can possibly start to enable the ecosystem, if that makes sense to you.
Rajan, if you want to add.
Yeah, I think one of the things this does is really giving India an opportunity in terms of our startups and our innovations, and to be able to drive IP generation. I think this is a great opportunity because we're all kind of at the starting line pretty much. And most of our future-oriented networks are going to be very heavily driven by software. And we excel in software. So when we ask the question, why do we need to look at other parts of the world? I think when we look at the dynamics that are emerging in India itself, and the opportunities that are resident here, and the peculiarities of what we experience in our country, I think it's a great opportunity to be able to incentivize startups. And this is where I think Mr. Desai, Professor Desai rightly said, we've got test beds. Test beds are starting up. We're encouraging application service providers to start coming and seeing if these things work. And we can create our own interfaces and integration into our networks if those make sense from a commercial perspective. And we're eager to be able to ensure that there's commercial viability vis-a-vis, because at the end of the day, we're not in CSR, we are in commercial mode, and that's ultimately what sustains these imperatives.
Fantastic. We have time for one final question from the audience. Go ahead, please.
So my question is to Mr. Rajan, from different newspapers and the media, came to know that there is a monopoly of a particular telecom operator, and the government is going to support by drafting the policies in its favor. The examples are the predatory prices and IOC charges. So do you feel, is it correct, and up to what extent it is correct?
I didn't completely, are you saying is that there are media reports where we have asked the government to address issues like license fees and spectrum usage charges on the industry? Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so very clearly, yes, we have positioned this because what we've said is that as an industry, the reason why we knock on the doors of the government is because 30% of every rupee that comes in goes back to the government, and that is not really reinvested in the industry. And if you look at our national, policy, 2018 National Digital Communications Policy, we're talking about $100 billion for 5 years, and that's conservative. And it's all to be raised from private enterprises, right? None of this is coming from the government. So if you're going to be able to say, go out and raise this type of money, financial health of the industry is paramount. And we're saying is that, look, if you want to be able to attract that from the get-go, which is like today, then you're saying is that address some of the immediate requirements. And we're saying, look, these are two short-term moves that can help. And by the way, it's just not the industry asking. TRI itself has recommended these things, saying is that, as you see, it's time we had a gliding path to about the %. And if you look at the license fee at 8%, there's another gliding path that can get us to a rate that is well acceptable and get some oxygen back. And I'll give you one particular example where the government clearly has an opportunity to help over here. The grant of spectrum. We've spent about 56,000 crore rupees on spectrum, of which about 30,000 plus crore rupees is held by the government. Every time the government grants spectrum, I have to pay 18% as GST. How does this make sense that after I've paid upfront for spectrum, that when you grant me the spectrum, you ask me to pay another 18%? I mean, these are not the types of sustainable levies of the industry. So there's all kinds of short-term things that the government can do to be able to get the financial oxygen back into the industry. Because at the end of the day, yes, Jio is there and they will invest and others. But at the end of the day, the question is we need a vibrant, competitive landscape where we incentivize one another. And I think the government needs to get out and incentivize by getting the financial wherewithal back into the industry.
Great. Thanks, Rajan. We'll get one final question, one quick question from your end, if you want to just...
I think it's fascinating. Ayush Sharma from Sterlite Tech. So it was fascinating to hear about the shared infrastructure. I mean, Gopal mentioned about the fiber. I'm glad that there's a software being mentioned here. There was no discussion on the AI front, which we kind of see in the Western counterparts, talking about the three big components, that's fiberization, software, and AI. So I'm glad that the software was kind of brought out, and India being the sort of software powerhouse, I guess the onus is on us Indians to define the sort of open source specifications for the 5G, which means we could redefine. We don't have to follow the way the 4G networks have been built in a more vertically integrated boxes, and the innovation needs to happen. So if you need to promote the startups in India, or if you need to promote the AI and the new innovation in India, so I think what we need to do is also have a probably India open source forum to define those specifications, et cetera. So just wanted to throw that kind of an option for any of you to sort of comment on that.
If I may take that one, couldn't agree more. Right? I think, though we didn't touch upon all of those three components here in the panel, but I think we're fully aligned with that in all of our work. With stakeholders globally, we've seen that those are the three components, and couldn't agree more. If we may quickly wrap up with Professor Desai making a quick comment.
I took this opportunity. I mean, thank you very much. There is one word which has not been mentioned since morning, and coming from academics, I think this is what's going to make or break 5G, and the word is security. I'll repeat it twice more: security, security. With ubiquitous connectivity, machines, things, human beings, unless you have security, nobody is going to adopt that. So I think somewhere, next time a 5G forum is organized, there has to be an exclusive session on security.
Fair enough, Professor Desai. So on that secure note, if I may close the panel out, thank you so much to all the panelists for participating. Thank you.